everyone.
Morning.
So we are going to start today's program, and I'd like to start by saying Happy Black History Month, or African American Heritage Month, and also Happy Valentine's Day. So on behalf of Stephen Rubenstein, who is the chairman of ABNY, and myself, I want to welcome you here today for this very inspiring conversation. I'm an optimist by heart, and I've spent a lot of my career finding ways to support communities sort of build and revitalize, and today's conversation is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I will say, Stephen, I got an earful from Stephen yesterday about planning this event on this very particular topic when he's on vacation. He hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years. So yeah, he wasn't very happy with me because he really wanted to be here today. So in the spirit of ABNY, in Stephen's spirit, again, I want to welcome you here and just, really thank you for joining us for the Association for a Better New York, affectionately known as ABNY's ABNYTalks series, and specifically today in honor of Black History Month, and really looking at the evolution of Black communities in our city, across the nation, and looking at culture development and economic empowerment. So to kick off today's event, we will have joining us is the Commissioner for the Department of Cultural Affairs. She is running a little late, so we're going to start, and then when she gets here, she's going to say a few words, but we really wanted to include her in this space here at Lincoln Center, representing not only the city, but historically a district that has gone through a lot of these changes. So when she gets here, she'll join us and she'll talk about her history. Many of us in this room have really spent our careers and our lives looking at ways to uplift, support, revitalize, and protect Black communities, right? And as the economic, cultural, spiritual survival of Black communities are really being threatened right now, it's really important for us to look at ways and examine the trajectory of Black communities here in our city and beyond, to really look for best practices and look at ways that development and the built environment here in the city, both built environments in communities of geography as well as communities of collectiveness, has really worked through these issues. But more importantly, today is an opportunity to really look at and find opportunities for growth as the city changes, as our communities change, and as we deal with structural barriers that have prevented many of these poor communities of color across our city from really realizing their full potential. So, throughout the years, Black communities have always found ways to survive and really thrive, right? If you look through methods of cooperative economics, right, dating back to post-Reconstruction era, been joined by the Commissioner. But really, looking at the Black nationalist movement, right, early in the century, when there was really a need to develop a way and to develop independent African-American economic base through job creation and workforce development, right? Communities did that. And through the survival of entrepreneurship, right? When no one else would buy or sell to Black Americans, right? Black Americans had to find a way to survive themselves, which led to the creation of thriving Black economic ecosystems like the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? It's a shame that many people are just learning about it, right? Because we know through oppression and structural issues, information like this have been suppressed. And this was really despite the fact that consistently over history, there has been efforts to prevent and to destroy economic outcomes of solidarity in Black communities. And Black communities have been resilient through social movements, right? If we look through movements that led to legislative mechanisms and strategies, like the era of the Great Society, right? Really advocating through those times, a set of domestic programs that were aimed at eliminating poverty and racial injustice in the United States. And the fight against massive urban renewal programs, right? We're here today in a place that was a victim of urban renewal plans that were really designed to disenfranchise and disconnect and displace people of color and poor people, and really combat things like loan discrimination and redlining and practices that really led to income insecurity and led to racial wealth gap, particularly for African Americans. But Black communities have always found a way to be resilient. And as we explore the evolution of Black communities here in today's discussion, it's also worth remembering the legacy of Black and brown neighborhoods in our city. San Juan Hill, where we are right now, was home to New York City's largest Black population around the turn of the century, and later significant Puerto Rican population with more than 7,000 families and 800 businesses were displaced in the 1950s as part of the Lincoln Square Development Plan, one of many government-led urban renewal programs across the country. This plan replaced existing residential and commercial buildings with a series of superblocks, right? We've seen that all across this country and definitely in the city. And other developments, including Fordham University, Lincoln Towers, and Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Now, stories like this are not always told, right? That's a fact, we know that. And even as we acknowledge this today, it's important to recognize that Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts is working to be that exception, right? Not to sweep it under the rug, but address this head on. Lincoln Center recently partnered with Centro, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture to honor the legacy of this neighborhood, San Juan Hill, and uplift the stories of the people that lived here. This partnership is one of the many ways Lincoln Center is delivering deeply and doing the hard collaborative work guided by those around us and those who were here before to confront, understand, learn, and honor this history. San Juan Hill was home to many icons that many don't know about. I didn't know about it until I started to do the research for this event, right? Thelonious Monk, legendary jazz pianist and composer. Graham Ramirez, jazz pianist and composer known for Love a Man, first made for the famous Billie Holiday, my mother's favorite artist. Barbara Hillary, the first African-American woman to reach both the North and South Poles. You know Black people don't like to go home. And James Anderson, founder of Amsterdam News, originally produced and published from his home in San Juan Hill. Now I can talk about this stuff all day long. I love this stuff. This is my topic. But you're not here to listen to me, right? You're here to hear from the esteemed panelists we put together for this discussion. So as I introduce them, I welcome you to the stage. First, we have, actually, let's have the commissioner speak. Where is she? Oh, there she is. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commissioner for the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, Lori Cumbo. She was appointed as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the City of New York by Mayor Adams in March of 2022 and has a long history with arts and culture in our city. And as we kick off this morning's discussion here at David Rubenstein Atrium at Lincoln Center, the site of San Juan Hill, we are honored to have Commissioner Cumbo join us. Commissioner, the stage is yours.
Good morning.
Morning.
Wow, I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and new faces and excited faces for Black History Month. This is certainly a historic Black History Month on so many fronts. I'm so pleased on so many levels. As many people ask me, are you the first African American commissioner for the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs? And I'm so happy to say, no, I am not the first, right? This is so great because it shows that we are making progress. Dean Mary Schmidt Campbell was the first African American woman to serve in this position, and so I'm very proud to continue the tradition and the legacy of excellence that she brought forward. But it's fantastic that now we are breaking so many boundaries that we're not just seeing the first anymore. We are starting to really see the diaspora included in so many elements of American history and studies, and particularly in our cultural institutions, which I'm so excited to talk about. So for many of you that have seen me many times, you have heard me talk so passionately about the arts. I feel like that is my calling in life, and I'm so passionate about it because I understand the power of the arts in New York City. And when the arts thrive, when the artists thrive, all of New York City thrives. And it's so important for us to remember that and to keep that centered. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the numbers, okay? Because the numbers are very important because the numbers inspire people to understand the power and the impact of the arts. In 2019, New York City's arts, entertainment, and recreation sector generated $7.4 billion in total wages. That's from our New York State Controller. Over 117,000 jobs are generated by the arts in the metropolitan area, according to Americans for the Arts. The arts have a $5.6 billion impact on New York City and New York, New Jersey metropolitan economy. And industries which benefit the most from this $5.6 billion activity in order of importance and significance are real estate. Real estate benefits incredibly from the arts. You all see it on so many different levels. Every time you're looking for an apartment or you're looking to buy a home, it's always minutes away from some cultural institution or organization. Only a train stop away from BAM or Lincoln Center or Wheatsville. The arts are a major part of the selling point for real estate in New York City, and I'm going to come back to that. Business and professional services, wholesale and retail trade, eating and drinking establishments. Our small businesses are directly linked to the success of our cultural institutions. When our cultural institutions are thriving, you all know it. You go out for a theater, you go out to a performance or a museum, somebody's in town visiting, you want to go to that theater, you want to go to that performing arts center, and then you want to go and get something to eat. It happens in art and culture more than it does in any other sector. When we think a lot about sports or basketball or football, great activities, but you don't always say, let's go get brunch and then go see the game. It doesn't necessarily work in the same kind of way. Some do it, but it's a little bit different with the arts. The arts generate hunger, and we definitely want to eat in restaurants and our local businesses in the community. Also, utilities, transportation, medical and educational services, finance and insurance all benefit from the arts. The more than 1,900 arts institutions in the region inspire and entertain an annual audience of 64 million people. Our 1,900 organizations entertain 64 million people, 13 million of whom are visitors from outside the region. Tourism employed 283,200 people in 2019. In 2019, New York was the most visited city in the Western Hemisphere with 67 million visitors. All right? Are you all paying attention yet? Are we understanding the power of the arts? All right. We had 56 million visitors last year, up 70% from 2021. With China reopening, we expect that number to further increase. The arts are essentially, on so many levels, what brought New York City back. People wanted to come back to New York City because they recognize that this is the cultural epicenter of the world. And what we all know is that people are coming for the artistic dynamism that is right here in New York City. Arts have a profound benefits for our community, especially Black and brown communities. The social impact of the Arts Project, also known as SIAC, whose research has helped develop city investment in the arts for a number of years, shows a correlation between cultural assets as being the foundation for safer, stronger, and healthier communities. We're talking a lot about public safety in New York City, but when we recognize that we give our young people art supplies, art classes, instruments, instruction, theater production, the ability to have music studios within their schools or in their cornerstone programs within our NYCHA developments. When they have access, and my goal and dream, obviously, is to extend the school day to 6 p.m. to create a rich environment for cultural activity and programming, I believe that we will certainly change the dynamic of public safety in New York City. Because we can't, right? We can't keep telling our young people to say no to everything without giving them the resources of what to say yes to. It is our job, and everyone in this room, to give our young people what they can say yes to. And we have to do it robustly, as adults, as leaders, as critical thinkers, as the people that are moving and shaking this New York City. If we do not invest in the opportunities of what to give our children to say yes to, they are going to continue to pick up a gun instead of a paintbrush. They're going to continue to be part of gangs and those sorts of things if we don't give them a way to channel that entrepreneurial spirit into business development and artistic creativity. That's our job. Really, our job is to educate and to make better a society for the next generation to inherit, for them to then take their dreams to the next level. But I can go on about that because I'm very inspired by it. I also want to talk a little bit about the role that the arts have on academic performance for our students. Students who have had an art education are 55% more likely to have completed post-secondary coursework by adulthood and 29% more likely to earn a 4-year college degree by age 32. For these and so many more, the administration and Mayor Eric Adams has made record-breaking investments in culture. Over $230 million in expense, as well as $220 million for cultural capital projects. I just want to brag on that for a minute because this is the largest cultural budget ever in New York City's history, and it happened during a pandemic at a time when the arts were being cut all across this country. Mayor Eric Adams doubled down and made sure that arts and culture was a premier element of this city's budget, right? Because you know that the arts are always on the chopping block, the first to go. The first thing that we all recognize and see is we don't need that. Like, we need to focus on the things that are critical. Without arts in your life, we are a soulless city. We are a soulless people unless we are continuing to invest in our heritage, our culture, our history, what makes us important, what makes us thrive. And in addition to rolling out record expense funding through our Cultural Development Fund, where equity reforms by organizations serving people of color have benefited immensely. More than 82% of groups that identify as being led or founded by people of color saw an increase in their baseline awards in this city's budget. And for capital, let me tell you, I am so excited because many of you may know that I founded a museum in Brooklyn called MoCADA, the Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora and Arts. And I started that dream in 2000. But it is so exciting to be here in this position to help other cultural leaders shape, inform, and bring their visions to reality. So for many cultural organizations and Black and brown communities, so many of them exist in their living rooms, in their basements, in their kitchens, in all kinds of spaces that are not necessarily the most appropriate for cultural institutions. But what I'm proud of in my tenure, Studio Museum in Harlem will open a new building with over $60 million in city funding. The National Black Theater will open its brand new home, realizing the vision of Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, who believed and knew and had the foresight to know that a building or land that she purchased on 125th Street and 5th Avenue was premier real estate, and that she was going to develop a theater as well as an affordable housing project that was going to benefit and solidify Harlem residents for generations to come. We invested $11 million in a home for the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance, led by recent Grammy Award winner Arturo O'Farrill. We were able to put funding into the Louis Armstrong House to have a new educational center coming online. All of you know about the Universal Hip Hop Museum, right? That's going to be opening up in the Bronx, where hip hop was born over 50 years ago in the Bronx. Hard for me to say that as a Brooklyn resident, but I got through it, right? Because we've been claiming hip hop the whole time, but we're going to let the Bronx take that because it's universal. It's universal, right? The Noah Pointer Foundation will have a new home in Brooklyn, New York. And we are so proud to continue the legacy of Noah Pointer right here in Brooklyn, New York. Weeksville Heritage Center is the first new member of the cultural institution groups in a generation. So we are so happy that we were able to put our arms around Weeksville and to make sure that Weeksville is here for generations to come by including them in what's known as the cultural institutions group. It's for organizations that are on city-owned land that the city recognizes their responsibility as a landlord to take care of those organizations in terms of providing equity funding, utility funding, funding for staffing, as well as security and maintenance, and many other costs associated with operating an institution. And a new cultural institution will be coming online in the Brooklyn Cultural District. We will have space for 651 Arts and Mokata, and we are also looking forward to recognizing our first African Art Museum by Mr. Eric Edwards. So we're looking forward to that as well. So a lot of great things are coming online. And so when we talk about, does voting matter? Will my vote count? How do we continue to move the envelope? It absolutely does. And when you see this cultural budget and where we've been able to put resources and dollars of your tax-paying dollars back into our community, then we truly understand the importance of art and culture and the ability to make sure that we invest in our communities. Now I'm gonna close with a call to action because there's a lot of work to do on this. All of these extraordinary organizations mean so much to our city, to our children, economic activity, social vibrancy. For our seniors, we have an incredible program called Sukasa in city government, where we send artists into our senior centers in order to bring artistic and cultural activity there. And amplifying Black heritage has been so profoundly influential in New York City. But culture in New York City is a public-private partnership. So what I'm hoping is that all of you today can recognize and bring this back to your communities, because this is so critical. I hope if anything that I do today inspires this on so many levels. It's a public-private partnership. And in order for these organizations, everything from Studio Museum to Weeksville to Noah Pointer Foundation, these organizations definitely need that private partnership. When I talk about how influential real estate benefits from art and culture, we have to understand that all of these sectors have a critical role in lifting up these organizations. So if you all are not serving on a board, consider Black History Month this opportunity for you to identify spaces and places that speak to your mission statement to say, how can I become involved? How can I become a donor to this particular organization? Right, Jelani? So we have to make sure that we pick out those organizations and make sure that we support them. We can't just leave it all to government and say government should handle that. Government, as well as the public-private partnership, is what really makes cultural institutions thrive. When we were able to put our arms around Weeksville had to do a campaign. Many of you heard they did a GoFundMe campaign where they raised $500,000 to save Weeksville so that it would not close, and then government was able to step in. We need that $500,000 GoFundMe every year for the organizations that you are most passionate about. The other thing that I would also recommend or suggest in this Black History Month, when I founded Mokata, there were few, if any, Black or African American foundations, right? We need to create African American BIPOC foundations that specifically support our culture so that our organizations are not always at the mercy of foundations and organizations and corporations that don't necessarily look like us or reflect our values. When we begin to create our own foundations and our own funding sources, then we have more power and control to control our messaging, what we need for our young people, and how we need to communicate our messages. Our artists have incredible and powerful messages that need to get out that cannot be censored. And we've understood in this government sector and the way things are changing and the censorship that's coming about all across this nation, our artists have to have the freedom to be able to speak about the social justice issues that are impacting their communities on a day in and day out basis. So it's so critical that we recognize that we all have a strong responsibility in making sure that our cultural institutions are as strong as they can be. Because essentially, cultural institutions are what bring about the education, and the spiritual and moral values that a society needs. Nothing can bring a community together, particularly in rapidly gentrifying communities, like art and culture, to bring people into spaces so that we can talk about the art and the message versus being at each other's throats. It's important for us to recognize that art has that ability to bring people together, and we have to make sure in a vibrant city like New York City, we are doing everything that we can to bring the arts home and to make sure that these institutions are supported so that we can continue to have those types of rich and affordable conversations within our community. So I am going to close here because you all have so many great speakers and a wonderful panel that's about to take place here, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. I thank ABNY for the opportunity as Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs to represent Mayor Eric Adams at this critical time in our nation's history. And the arts are going to not bring us back, the arts are going to bring us forward. We are going to move forward in a vibrant way, a more culturally diverse and equitable way. And I thank all of you here for your participation, because as I see so many familiar faces, I know that these are the real doers of New York City. So I thank you for your service, and I thank you for the work that you are doing. And I look forward to seeing you at a cultural institution, spending your money, joining that board, bidding on that project, and making sure that it all happens. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Right? You always got to end what you're saying with an ask. So please, in the spirit of giving, in the spirit of Black History Month, please get involved with cultural institutions, support cultural institutions, because they continue the legacy of culture. So it's really important. So now to our panelists. First, we have Loree Daniel Favors. I first met Loree when we were doing the census work, and her passion for not only the work, but the economic and inclusion of people of African descent is remarkable. Loree Daniel Favors is the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College in New York City. And it's the city's only law center committed to the advancing the justice and equity for people of African descent. She is an activist and attorney with a lifelong commitment to racial and social justice. Ms. Daniel Favors founded the Daniel Favors Law PLLC, and a law firm focused on economic and racial justice. Designed and co-founded Sankofa Community Empowerment, Inc., a nonprofit organization designed to educate and empower communities of African descent, among many other organizations that she's founded or been a part of. In 2021, Ms. Daniel Favors was appointed to the New York City Racial Justice Commission, convened by Mayor Bill de Blasio, and we also have former Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, who's responsible for putting that together. And this commission was really developed to identify structures and systems that by design, implementation, or impact enable and perpetuate inequitable power, access, and opportunity. And she currently hosts the Loree Daniel Favors show on Sirius XM Urban View Network. So you have to listen to her if you haven't tuned in. Loree, please join us. Next we have Kareem Hudson. As founder and CEO of Genesis Company, Mr. Hudson oversees the firm and its strategic direction. Mr. Hudson's experience as an investment banker at Merrill Lynch and Goldman Sachs has really provided the expertise that now devotes Genesis financial strategies. Mr. Hudson holds several advisory seats in local organizations, including his roles as trustees of the Randall Island Park Alliance and a member of the Reform Leadership Council for Vera Institute of Justice. Genesis, through the leadership of Mr. Hudson, has developed many real estate projects in his hometown and neighborhood of Harlem, USA, where he lives with his wife and his 2 daughters. Next, we have Reverend Patrick O'Connor. The Reverend Patrick O'Connor is the lead pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica, a multicultural congregation in the Presby of New York City. He has served on the congregation since 1992. In 2002, he transitioned his model for ministry from a program model to a purpose-driven model, which recognizes that each Christian and each congregation has a God-given purpose to fulfill. He is passionate about community engagement and the development of people and communities, and commits himself to programs which have that vision. Reverend O'Connor is now a nonprofit real estate developer, I'm so proud to say, with the newly constructed the Tree of Life Housing Project, which is a mixed-use, mixed-income, 100% affordable housing development in downtown Jamaica. Next, we have J. Philip Thompson. Phil Thompson is the Associate Professor of Urban Planning and Politics at a very small institution called MIT. I don't know if you ever heard of it. And he was the Deputy Mayor of New York, for the City of New York. He was the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policies Initiatives. As Deputy Mayor, Mr. Thompson oversaw nearly 20 agencies, including Small Business Services, Workforce and Consumer Affairs, Immigration, and Youth Programs. Mr. Thompson was also co-chair of the Task Force on Racial Equity and Inclusion and a member of the Charter Revision Commission. Mr. Thompson's academic research focuses on Black politics, community development, and political economy. Mr. Thompson earned a PhD in political science from the City University of New York Graduate Center, woo-hoo! And a master's degree in urban planning from Hunter College, woo-hoo! Sorry, I'm a proud graduate of CUNY. And a BA in sociology from Harvard University. And to moderate this impressive panel is my boy, where'd he go? Oh, here he is. Patrick B. Jenkins. He has more than 15 years of experience in community relations, government administration, and public policy. He founded the Patrick B. Jenkins, a consultant firm specializing in strategic solutions for businesses and campaigns, government and community relations. Mr. Jenkins started in government and community relations with the New York City Comptroller's Office before serving for 7 years as the executive assistant to a Queens member of the U.S. Congress. He is committed to the betterment of Black communities, and he illustrates this consistently through his work all around, not only his clients, but his civic work, and his financial commitments, because it's great to volunteer, it's great to show up, but he also puts the check behind it, which we always appreciate. But he really makes financial commitments regularly to community-based efforts. So with that, I leave the stage to you all.
Good morning, good morning. You told me to hold the mic close, so I'll do that. Thank you to ABNY, thank you Melva Miller, a queen from Southeast Queens. I myself, born and raised in Jamaica, Queens. I actually still live in the house I grew up in, so I've seen the evolution of a Black community and Black communities in New York City all my life. And so I'm happy to be here, I'm proud to be here, and my job is to ask some questions and get out of the way so that the smart people can answer them. So I will do that. I'm going to start this morning with Mr. Thompson, Deputy Mayor Thompson. You have an extensive background in New York City government. You've previously served as Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives in the last administration, and you served in the Dinkins administration. Before that, you served in the Manhattan Borough President's Office, among many other very impressive roles. Looking back on your experience as a public servant, combating housing inequality for Black residents, in addition to other groups, what lessons have you learned? And how can the current and future administrations mitigate displacement risks for Black neighborhoods?
Well, thank you. I just want to say my mother met my father at Allen A&B in the early 19th, so I claim that at least I was, the thought of me started there. So I think one of the things the city has to do is to help find low-cost sites, land for affordable housing. And one place to start is with night shift, and a few of us were talking about that earlier. NYCHA has some of the most valuable real estate in the city, and a lot of it is underdeveloped, and meaning there could be a lot more density on these sites. If you go a block and a half from here, you'll see 16-story NYCHA buildings next to 80-story luxury condo buildings, so NYCHA as of right could go to 80 stories. And if you do it mixed use, it could spin off a lot of revenue. The residents fear displacement, and that's why they fight rebuilding on those sites. And so I think the city needs to offer incentives for existing residents so they'll support it. Another area is CUNY. CUNY has a lot of land, over 20 million square feet of undeveloped air rights right now. And again, there needs to be some vision about how developing that land could actually provide revenue for CUNY, but also help students out and also help revitalize neighborhoods. Third, in the outer boroughs in particular, there are a lot of libraries that could build on top of affordable housing, and that needs to be explored systematically. And four, just on sites, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, a lot of these places, right on the rail lines, just outside the boundaries of the city. I think the state should be very active in providing affordable housing in those places where land is much cheaper, and it's really they're part of New York City. Two other things. We have a lot of labor unions with a lot of pension funds. Co-op City was built entirely with labor pension funds. They have more money now than they did then. Their members are complaining about lack of affordable housing, but they're really not engaged to the level where they could be in putting their pension funds to work to build workforce housing. And I think that's basically an untapped resource. And I think the city and state should guarantee returns on their pension investments if it's for affordable and workforce housing. And that was the deal that built Co-op City. And most important in my mind, we should do more to enable good jobs for working people rather than only focus on making housing cheaper, because if people aren't making any money, no housing is affordable unless it's free, and people are not making enough money. And that's the other way to fight displacement. And to me, our MWBE programs and our workforce programs, quite honestly, lack strategy and focus. And now is the perfect time to address these issues with trillions of federal dollars about to hit cities and states as part of the Infrastructure Bill, Inflation Reduction Act, and CHIPS and Science Act.
Thank you. And it's really important how you emphasize the use of current public resources that we have at our disposal that we can enhance use. The next question is for Reverend Patrick O'Connor. According to the most recent data from the NYU Furman Center, Black home ownership is more prevalent in Queens than any other borough. 48% of Black residents own their homes compared to 33% of all New Yorkers aggregately. As a resident of Jamaica and a well-respected community leader and recently a nonprofit developer, can you explain why Black home ownership is more frequent in Queens for Black residents? Are there any distinctions between Queens and the other boroughs that make home ownership more conducive there?
Queens has a twofold story. In 1920, there were less than 5,000 Black people living in Queens. 1932, when Fats Waller bought property in Adelaide Park, it led to a court challenge when the next white family decided to sell property to a Black person. Empowered by the Supreme Court in 1948, it opened the door to Black luminaries like James Brown, Joe Louis, Lena Horne, to purchase property, and then the others followed. School teachers, bus drivers, folks who were working in healthcare, working in banking and other industries had the opportunity. We should name that Queens benefited from white flight because as white folks moved out to Long Island, housing stock became available. And I think as we celebrate the fact that Queens has this significant presence of black homeowners, we should note that they paid higher interest rates, that there was redlining, there was these restricted covenants which made it significantly harder to own. But I think the folks from both the Great Migration and then the later immigrants to Queens saw the opportunity. And the black story is that if you give us opportunity, whatever the hardships may be, we're going to find a way. And so that's part of the Queen story which we celebrate today.
Thank you very much. My father bought his first house in South Jamaica just from that situation. Next question is for Karim Hudson. Karim, corporate social responsibility is a priority for ABNY, as well as our membership. As Chief Executive Officer of Genesis, a for-profit development organization, your firm often advances ventures with meaningful purpose, including but not limited to dedicated home for formerly homeless individuals and veterans, and often black residents who are displaced. Given your storied experience and expertise in housing development and investment banking, what are for-profit developers getting right concerning revitalization and preservation of black communities in New York? And conversely, where can they improve?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. I feel a certain type of way. I thought I was technology forward. I got a paper, everybody's got a tablet. Wow. Anyway, I'm gonna keep it pushing. A couple of quick things I'll say. One, I think, I don't really make a distinction between for-profit and non-profit developers. That's really a political talking points. I think, when we talk about uplifting the black community, I think we really have to think about where we've done well and where we haven't, specifically in the affordable housing community. I can't really speak to other development communities necessarily. I think the push for greener, smarter, healthier housing has been phenomenal, and it's something we need to continue to invest in and push for electrification, all those things. Two, I think a push for smarter homes, and I mean not just home ownership, but also rental. When I say homes, it's an important push. We need to continue investing in that, giving folks access to affordable, high-quality Wi-Fi, rethinking the way that we do and spend on utilities in smarter ways. These are things that we need to continue to invest in. I think those are things we're doing well. We've completely missed the boat on services and affordable housing. We think at the end of the day that if we create a unit, we're good, and that's absolutely not the case. Residents aging out of independent living, residents with mental health conditions. We need folks who can get into those doors and make a difference in those families' lives. And we can't assume that developers who have no skill set to really be able to provide services are going to be able to do that in an effective way. And we can't just have folks knock on the door and the resident says, hey, we don't need anything, and they walk away. Because that's a huge issue. I would also say, from an industry standpoint, and I would say to all of y'all who are trying to be advocates, that we're all stuck in our individual corners. We're fighting 421A, we're fighting subsidy per unit, we're fighting this and that. If criminal justice fails, I fail. If the public education folks and education reform folks fail, I fail. All of this stuff is linked. And when you own housing, you see it every day, because these families deal with every single issue that I just talked about, whether you deem it a housing issue, a criminal justice issue, or education issue, or a food justice issue. All of those matter. And so we have got to figure out a way to start working together and think about how do we uplift communities as a whole, not think about what our individual political point is that we want to argue about.
Thank you very much. Lorene, There was a recent New York Times report on the exodus of Black residents in New York. Many who opted to leave the city cited soaring rents, a dearth of home ownership opportunities, and inflation as primary reasons. What are the long-term cultural implications this shift will have for a city that prides itself on diversity and has a celebrated African-American legacy?
So thank you for the question. This is what I actually look like, but COVID is still a thing, so this is what we're going to see for the rest of the event. But thank you for the question and for the opportunity, along with the comments already shared by co-panelists. I think the comments that our commissioner shared at the very beginning, where she was laying out the impact of the arts and what investment in the arts can create, that highlights for us the best of options. What happens when you lose the flavor of a city is you lose the birthplaces of the artists. And when the artists are coming from the communities that tend to be among the most marginalized, that tend to be the most disenfranchised, that tend to be the most underserved and under-resourced, and then you price those communities out of existence, where are the new artists coming from? Where are the new cultural institutions coming from? And when we think about the long-term impact of that, prior to coming to this event today, just, you don't have to raise your hand, no shade, no embarrassment, but how many of you knew about the history of this place before you read the notice in the ABNY document? Right, so we have 1, 2, brave souls, yes, thank you, 3, okay, but think about the breadth of resources in this room, of people who did not know that this was a thriving African, Pan-African community at one time, and now it is plastered over. We sit in a lovely building, and we're all glad to be here, but the reality is that we are going to make this city inhospitable for the very communities that provide the culture and the flavor. Here you go. Imagine a wonderful meal at one of our tables, well-seasoned, food is moisturized, it's delicious, it's flavorful. And then imagine that same meal at a table where they don't use seasoning, where it's salt and pepper and a dash of hope. That's what the arts end up looking like. And so when we are talking about the birthplace of hip hop, we've got institutions right now going up to praise on the legacies, the decades of investment that Black artists have put into this community. When you price them out of these spaces, it becomes like a very bland version of what it once will be. Now, the challenge is, how many of us will be here to remember it? There will be a plaque, there will be a memorial put up, I'm sure, but that essence, the spirit, the soul of the city that our commissioner was just talking about, what happens when your soul is so vapid and so empty that you can only remember what organic artistic creation in this space looks like? Maybe through a meme, maybe through a virtual presentation, but certainly not something that you can experience in a living, breathing, resonating kind of way.
Thank you. And I think the theme that we're hearing, you can clap for that. You know, the history is important, and understanding the foundations for every one of these aspects is very important. I'm going to go back to Deputy Mayor Thompson. As mentioned previously, you spent a good deal of your career in government service, but you are also a trained historian and urban planner. Are there any parallels that you can draw between New York City and other major cities with respect to displacement of Black communities? And what lessons should New York City and state policymakers, CBOs, and real estate developers learn from that example?
Well, I would say that one of the things we find all across the country and New York as well is that Black communities and BIPOC communities, we've gotten better at getting Black faces in high places. We had a Black mayor, we have a Black mayor, again. We had a Black president, we have some Black foundation heads, and on and on. But where power is really exercised is through institutions. So big corporations have research and development departments and full-time lobbyists, and they're knocking at the door all the time. We don't have a Black economic think tank in New York. We spend $50 billion a year in procurement, just the city, the state more than that. But if I were to ask someone, okay, what are the highest levels of procurement? Where's the money going? And how many Black firms are getting those contracts? You get a lot of blank looks because there's no analysis of that. Well, I can tell you what it is. The bigger contracts are for mechanical engineering. And we've been stuck at the lower levels of the building trades, laborers, etc. There's not a single Black mechanical engineering firm in the Northeast. I've only found 2 in the United States of America. And that's where the money's going. And when we're talking about green, that's what green boils down to in large part, is that particular trade the same I could go for electrical engineering, and computer science? So I think, and if you look at where displacement is happening of black folks, it's mainly in cities where there's a big growth in tech. And because black folks are not getting those good tech jobs. And people who get those jobs are displacing black folks in neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy. And so I think we need to, A, be more strategic and build institutions, which is why I like when Melva started talking about cooperative economics and cooperation, because you don't do this individually. We need to figure out how to work together. The other thing is, I've been talking to David Banks, the school's chancellor, about this. We have to move education away from just taking tests. The Regents exam is really established to prove to us that black kids aren't stupid. So see, we passed this test, we're not stupid, but there's no other reason for this approach to education, and we gotta get past that. At MIT, we created a program that merges computer science and urban studies to train the next generation of computer scientists to actually have practical solutions for urban problems. That ought to start in the 8th grade in New York City. It used to be vocational education was in one box, academic track was in another box. That's gone at MIT, at Stanford, at Caltech, because actually applied work is thinking work, and thinking work, if it's going to be value, has to have some application. So we've moved beyond that, except in our public schools. So to me, that is the big thing we have to change. So we start preparing our kids to play leadership roles in the emerging tech economy, the health tech economy, and also in rebuilding America through these trillions of dollars coming out through these federal bills. And that's what David and I are talking about. That's how we get more income and wealth into our communities. And if we don't do that, nothing's gonna save us.
Thank you very much for that answer. Let me go to this question. Reverend O'Connor, you are the chair of the first Jamaica Community and Urban Development Corporation, a key stakeholder in a newly developed Tree of Life Center at a mixed-use building offering 174 apartment units, as well as space for programs that will provide resources to the Jamaica community and the building residents there. Can you speak to the impact that this new development will have for Jamaica, a historically underserved black community, and how can other developers replicate that development model across the city?
So let me start by saying New York City is in a 911 moment. When folks spend between 50 and 68% of their income, household income, on rent or mortgage, that's not sustainable. We've seen many of the articles recently in the Times, the Daily News, and in Cranes, which describe young people 35 to 49 who are on their way from the city elsewhere because they just can't afford it. Tree of Life was our attempt to say that you can size a project, it can be financially feasible, and yet you can have reasonable rents which give folks a chance to get started. The bigger challenge, however, is housing, as Kareem said, doesn't exist in isolation. So we looked for partners. We have Cornell Cooperative Extension, which focuses on health and nutrition education all across the city as one of our partners. We have Community Health Care Network, a federally qualified health center, as part of the services in the building. We're working with Queens Community House to provide support for seniors, and we're in negotiations with a daycare partner to think comprehensively in one building, how can you have multiple services that connect people around what's important for them. Too often the development community thinks about just housing But housing without supports or housing without a community doesn't really work. Church sites like NYCHA are the real opportunities for black folks in the city. And if the administration, both the governor's administration and the mayor's administration, would prioritize both NYCHA and church sites, there's a real opportunity to do significant developments like Tree of Life all across New York City.
Thank you. And I think what we're hearing consistently also is it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a one thing. We need comprehensive, holistic change in the community to move it forward. And I think that that is that's a thread throughout it, this conversation. Karim, you live in Harlem right now with your family, of course, and just been a bastion for black culture and history, education. But now black residents are being displaced from Harlem. Could you dive into that a little bit? Why is this happening? Why are the demographics changing in Harlem? What do you see around you, culturally, educationally, economically, that's leading to this change happening now in Harlem?
Well, first of all, Harlem still is the bastion of black culture. Let's just, I'm Brooklyn. So, here we go, Brooklyn. We love y'all, look, I mean, why don't we start with what I worry about? And I don't know if I can answer the question totally on displacement, even though we have a mixed record. I worry about families coming to me saying they got hoodwinked out of their home by some bozo. I'm not that worried about the families who come to me to say, I've lived here for a long time and I built up equity and I want to write a new chapter in my life. I'm concerned about, I'm on the IBO, the Independent Budget Office, and the very first meeting that I attended, they talked about their share and the burden of centers, not community centers, but shelters, drug centers, those type of things, service providers. I frankly worry that Harlem is burning more than its proportional share, like more than its proportional share of these institutions. Basic things like garbage removal and rats is not being taken care of. My daughters walk down the street, shouldn't have to be like, what's happening here? Walking around garbage. So things that I care about. I think in the big story of displacement and equity, I mean, let's not forget the origins of what we did on the Community Reinvestment Act, which has somehow been forgotten, right? Like redlining, the disenfranchisement of black communities was not just about, places to live that were quality, that was a problem. It was also about black ownership and equity, which has somehow been erased from the legislation. And I'm not talking about just home ownership equity, I'm talking about mass scale entrepreneurial equity, right? So why don't we have the relateds, the generational real estate families that are black, and we are missing that entirely. And so, in my view, I want to talk about those issues. I want to talk about how do we figure out a way to create, entrepreneurs and real estate moguls that are black, right, and can have a say in these communities and can have ownership and can talk about how do we work with the community to create issues, to solve the issues. And I will say, as a 100% black owned firm, 50% black women running my firm in executive positions, I think that we are hiring black folks, we're hiring black professionals, we're creating professional advancement for black people who can live wherever they choose to live. And we can't keep just giving real estate over to this folks will look the same. Real estate itself has to open the industry, and we have to rethink how we're underwriting developers, how we're creating equity ownership, even with NYCHA, so that we diversify the ranks of these developers.
Thank you. Lurie, you currently serve as the Executive Director for Center for Law and Social Justice, an educational pillar in Brooklyn, that advocates for uplifting Black communities through racial justice. What inroads has your organization made to educate New Yorkers about the resources to support communities facing displacement? And what further insight or challenges have you discovered as a result of your activism?
So I think it would be helpful to define displacement a little more broadly than we often do. We often think about displacement in terms of physical displacement, but we also deal with cultural displacement. We deal with othering displacement. So in Brooklyn, for example, at Prospect Park, we have this wonderful drumming circle. If you've never been, it's phenomenal. And one of the first things that newcomers to the community began complaining about was the loudness of the drums. Now, they loved it when they were here on tour. They loved it when they were on a tour bus, but when they had to live in that space, culturally, there was a disconnect, and because they enter into these spaces of traditionally marginalized communities, our new neighbors have a greater sense of power, a greater sense of agency, and are able to shut down the very cultural institutions, displace them from within our communities. There was an article from the New Yorker not so long ago that talked about the quiet that comes down over communities. So you come to my community in Bedford-Stuyvesant, it's beautiful, it's lively, it's vibrant. At least it was when my husband and I first got there. My parents from Queens were very upset about us being in Bedford-Stuyvesant, but they were concerned about us being there. But now, because of all the new neighbors, you can hear pin drops on a block, a typical block. So the cultural displacement is a part of that. And that's something that's really been prevalent in the work that we're doing and what we're hearing from the folks that we're working with. One of the other challenges that we're facing, particularly when it comes to thinking about the physical side of displacement, is that yes, we need affordable housing. Yes, we need affordable renters. But there are intergenerationally owned multi-unit buildings right now owned by Black people who literally, because they have this asset, even though they themselves may be facing financial challenge, the pandemic certainly wreaked havoc on homeowners' ability to maintain their homes fairly and to maintain their homes within the family. One of the key issues that we're facing right now is that most Black homeowners who are finding themselves threatened by foreclosure don't qualify for legal services. So even though they can get pre-foreclosure counseling when it comes to foreclosure prevention, when it comes to actually raising their claims in court, viable legal claims that can show this developer or this bank does not own this mortgage, they do not have the note, they do not have the original documents, we have valid claims here, or there was deed theft, which has been devastating homeownership in our community, they don't actually qualify for the legal resources that have been put out there to keep people in their homes. So one of the things that we're doing at the Center for Law and Social Justice is researching how can we begin fundraising, how can we bring attorneys in-house so that we can provide these legal services, because we know they've got the claims. We know if they had an attorney standing with them the way the banks have attorneys standing with them, they would be able to hold on not just to their homes, but the equity. And what you can do with the equity as a first-time homeowner, it blew my mind when my husband and I realized, wait a minute, this isn't just, no, we're never selling this. This is retirement, this is college fund, this is seed money for additional properties. And so when the resources that are supposed to be put in place for some of the most challenged communities are essentially locked away from being accessed by the people in those communities who need them, it is a massive issue. And unfortunately, most of the funded housing preservation programs cannot hit that group of people because having the asset of a home themselves makes them no longer poor enough to qualify for those services. So vision, as was mentioned several times, your imagination, we have to be able to not just put a program together, drop it off, and keep it moving. We got to ask ourselves, do the follow-up. Is this actually meeting the target? Is the CRA actually producing the results that it should have been, that it's mandated to produce? And if not, where's the Black economic engines and think tanks that are going to be able to raise these issues so that we, the advocates, can pick up on them earlier in the game than we have now and be able to make the substantive adjustments that are necessary for those programs? So these are just some of the issues that we're facing, and this is not just a Brooklyn issue. This is a citywide issue, and if we do not have plans to keep the homeowners who are here, keep them in their homes, then we can bring in affordable housing. How are we going to have something for people to transition out of affordable housing into long-term home ownership if that bridge is broken, if that connection is not there?
Thank you. I don't know where Nova is, but conditions. Well, I can continue to ask questions, or I want to give the audience a chance to ask the panelists a question. But first, give the panelists a round of applause. It's a great perspective. Does anyone have a question? Just please stand and belt it out. I think we don't have a microphone.
Hi, my name is Roland Memphis, chairman of the Fortune Society. The issue of appreciation of intergenerational wealth. I don't know where we start to address that. When our father came back from World War II, he had seen combat at that stone. I started a real estate business. I'm sorry. I thought I was loud enough. I used to be an airborne army officer. Never used a mic. He could buy a house in Northwest Baltimore only because a real estate firm decided to break the restrictive covenants and sell it to him. The firm then turned around and sold other houses. This was an upper-class Jewish neighborhood. I was a Shabbat boy before I knew what a Shabbat boy was. And my dad was unable to buy any other property, but we bought the house. But then the real estate firm turned around and used straw buyers to buy additional houses, and then sold them to black doctors and lawyers. So basically, the income level of the neighborhood went up. And all my white friends were gone by the time I was 6 years old. And the neighborhood was full of blacks who went to Harvard and Dartmouth and Cornell. Now, the houses that were in this neighborhood are now worth a fraction of the houses that were available at the same time in Towson or Roland Park that restrictive covenants kept us from buying. In fact, when I finished law school, I bought a house in Riverdale. A classmate of mine went into labor law, so I had to do the closing myself. I'm sitting there with the Saul's attorney, and we're going through the deed. And he suddenly turns red. He had come to the clause and said, this house can never be sold to a person of the Negro race. I said, let's cross it out and let's move on initially. How do we ever overcome that? And my father couldn't get an FA, I mean, he was a veteran, combat veteran. But the restrictive covenants were not only restrictive covenants, they were also built into the federal housing programs from the Roosevelt administration. We were stuck. People ask me now, how can I make it up to you? I started to say, well, send me a check as a starter. But how do we ever address the greatest intergenerational appreciation of wealth that happened in this country? And we were forced to the sidelines. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, you just talked about the reason for the CRA bill, right, which they've kind of conveniently forgotten to correct, which is how do we create, real equity of value. Look, I think we got to start with prioritizing the need for economic success in our community, right, at an entrepreneurial scale, and also trying to make sure that it grows at a large scale. I think we've got to tell the banks that they've got to rethink the way they underwrite how to finance developers who are black, because we don't come from a generation of wealth that says, hey, I can put $3, $4, $5 million on your balance sheet, right? Genesis has been incredibly successful. We've turned around some of the most troubled housing, I think, in the city. We've done that at over 2,000 plus units, $600 million plus of real estate. But we still don't have the balance sheets that even some of our white counterparts that are half our size, right? And they're getting more opportunities than we are. And so I think we've got to look at the programs, we've got to look at the underwriting, we've got to figure out ways to say, look, we've got to level the playing field in a real way, not just provide equity into companies, but a level playing field in a real way to create opportunity for equity to be achieved and to be grown.
I would say a couple of things. One, as you said so eloquently, government created racial inequality. My father also was a World War II vet, and 5 million white vets got financing to buy homes after World War II, but the way it worked, the VA would reimburse a private bank when a bank gave a loan to a vet. The VA just didn't give you a loan, and when black folks, soldiers, veterans, went to the white banks for a loan, they got denied. Percy Sutton told me he went to 29 banks in a row to try and get money to buy the Apollo and got rejected 29 times in a row. It was the 30th time that, he finally got funded. And it was like that in housing, extreme. So government created that problem. government is obligated to fix it. We got to continue to fight for that and raise that issue. And Marie and I worked on the Racial Justice Commission, and this citizens passed 3 bills we proposed, which is exactly about that. But I think something else. I think we have to start at home. So NYSERS, which are New York City Public Workers, has $320 billion in pension funds. Almost all of the leaders of the unions are black or brown. I think 9 or 12 of the 12 are black. And the borough presidents also sit on the board. And when you talk about Related and other big real estate developers and hedge funds that are actually buying up properties and evicting people, a lot of that money is coming from NYSERS. 30% of these city employees, 30% are black women. Just black women are 30% of the employees. And their own money is being used to evict them from their neighborhoods. That's what I'm talking about when I say we don't have a think tank, we don't connect the dots, we don't educate and train our leaders who oversee these funds, there's not a business school course in America that says, hey, you're head of a union pension fund, what do you do to help your members? There's not a business school course in America about that. There's a course at every business school about how you take money out of that community, right? We don't have that. And I also think we need criteria to distinguish between great developers like Kareem and the black faces that white firms hire to front like they're for a community, because part of the reason there's distrust on the part of like union leaders of developers is because they don't know how to distinguish and they don't have any criteria. There's no one doing any research to say, hey, this brother is serving the community. We need to like invest in him big time, versus this one is a front for BlackRock and the money's just going, and they don't have a way to distinguish. We have to create those accountability mechanisms for when it comes to investment and when it comes to politics, as you know.
I think we also, so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in addition to the comments already mentioned, I think you're also laying out a wonderful case for why reparations is a serious conversation and must be explored at the government level and at all of the local levels thereunder. Because until we are able to take all of these efforts that are approaching this issue in bite-sized chunks without an overarching theme that recognizes the long-standing harm, this is why the demand for reparations is so persistent, because even with these solutions, these solutions which would help us going forward, we still have the issue of addressing the harms that have happened in the past. So I think it's a wonderful argument for why the Commission on Reparations, HR 40, should be upheld in Congress. And I know we're nonpartisan, but this is why if people are interested in those things, that those conversations are where we should definitely be steering this discussion as well.
I think also that we should stop uninventing the wheel. There's things that have worked. When you promote home ownership in black communities and neighborhoods, people develop generational wealth like other families, and it's transferable for multiple generations. The Southeast Queens example says, we became the wealthiest group of black people anywhere in America because of home ownership. Or recently, there's a story in Brooklyn sponsored by East Brooklyn Congregations, Nehemiah. Nehemiah homeowners have developed billions of dollars in equity because there was a commitment to providing subsidies so people could own. My dilemma as a leader in downtown Jamaica is that the city's investment has been supporting big developers who promote rental and will be rich forever, but there's limited home ownership opportunities because the programs don't exist.
Thank you. We have one more question.
I have a question.
Right here.
Okay. My name is Mari Moss. So we have a 22% population in New York City, African Americans. In Harlem, we went from 70% to just about 50% of our population. Somebody mentioned earlier that economic development or having creation of jobs is the most important part of being able to own homes. So 2% of African Americans own businesses in in New York City, period. How do we create access to capital so that we can increase jobs or increase owners, business owners in our community? And on the grassroots level, very grassroots, basic level from the community board, people who are serving on community boards, how can we make sure that we are increasing jobs in the community locally so that businesses are not displaced?
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
They're asking me to take it. I think we have to teach an entrepreneurial mindset to our kids first. I think we demonize business too much in the Black community. That needs to stop. We need to figure out ways to embrace it and figure out how to make money work for the community. I think that goes back to our roots in the civil rights. It's actually not something that's strange. I think that we have got to figure out how to collectively go to the banks, the institutions that are lending, CDFIs, and be more specific about what it is that we are looking for and seek, right? And provide the support to uplift those those businesses at a mass scale. But I think at the end of the day, we have to look at the folks who are doing business now in our communities, and we have to figure out whether or not they are employing people from the community and doing business in the community and recirculating that dollar, right? And demanding that these businesses are doing such, right? If we're bringing in developers, we're bringing in other folks who have no real connection to the community, then we're going to lose those dollars, we're going to lose that advocacy, and I think that's got to change. And I think at a mass scale, the underwriting of how folks look at, especially minority-owned businesses, is very paternalistic. We've got to turn that around to say, hey, look, let's figure out the folks who are really good entrepreneurs who are being successful, and let's reinvest them. Not reinvest them so they get to 10 and then they don't need anything anymore, let's go back to 0. But if you're at 10, 20, 30, 50, 75, 100, we want to get you 1,000 people, right? We need to continue to support you throughout that ecosystem. I think that's going to allow us to continue to progress. We can't just say it's only for people who have 0 to 100 employees. I think the MBWBE program in the state, right? It's like once you get to a certain level, folks like, oh no, you're not MBE anymore. Oh no, I'm still Black. It's this mentality that we can only help you to a certain level, and that really goes back to the question that the gentleman raised about entrepreneurial wealth. Because if you have the balance sheet, you continue to sustain success. If you don't, then you struggle.
I think one of the things that always makes me struggle about a question like this is that we've never really had access to capital, right? That's not a new phenomenon. And yet, prior to integration, we do know that we had Black-owned businesses, entrepreneurial spaces. Not a panacea. It wasn't utopia by any means. But there was something about knowing that you were not able to access other spaces that I think resulted, or at least contributed to the development of institutions within the community. If all of our best and brightest today are working primarily, present company excluded, primarily are working at institutions that are not Black-owned, they're not thinking about how to take the skills they're learning there and investing them in their own spaces. I mean, if we're not willing to have that part of the conversation, I struggle a little bit. I made a whole lot more money working as a corporate lawyer when I first came. I had a whole lot more money than I will probably ever make working as the Center for Law and Social Justice Executive Director. But if we are not going to have a part of the conversation that says, some of our best and brightest, we need you to make a different set of choices. We need you to not retire in those positions, but to bring some of those skills home, to build our versions of those institutions here. That's often a missing part of the conversation, and rightfully so, because you want to have those conversations in spaces that are going to be supportive and understand the context. But it is important for us to realize we've never had access to that capital. We do now have a different set of options. And those options have in some ways contributed to a brain drain that takes the talent out of the community, funnels it into well-packaged, lovely offices, and I'm not mad at anybody for doing that, but if we're serious about development from within the community, we're going to have to ensure that our Black professional class has a different set of options that they can consider while they're considering a success model that says do well in school, learn how to code switch effectively, interview well, get a good job working for our white brothers and sisters, make a lot of money, move into their neighborhoods before they fly out, do the white flight, and repeat this cycle all over again.
I agree that we need to really focus on ownership and business ownership and property ownership and land ownership and all those things. I think we also need to go back to our roots when it comes to forms of ownership. The notion that a company is just one person who makes all the money and everybody else just says yes and says yes, sir, boss, no, sir, boss. That model of business actually came out of slavery, literally. My father had a church in Philly. We were displaced by Highway 95. We built a whole new church, an entire block, through passing the plate. We funded it through cooperative economics in the community, and it's thriving to this day. We helped support Black funeral parlors. We helped create Black insurance companies. We did it through cooperative economics, but we've moved away from that as a people. So now there are Black banks in New York. There are some fintech, new Black banks in New York starting, but we bank at Bank of America and Citibank. Guess what? Federal government insures your bank account $250,000, whether you're in Bank of America or whether you're in Carver, it doesn't matter. You have the same protections. But we don't do that. And I mentioned before, our pension funds. We have access to capital. These union leaders have tons of capital. George Gresham is head of 1199. They have a $14 billion pension fund. That's just 1199. AFSCME and the other, they all have big amounts of capital. We have no thinking on how strategically we invest that money. They can't even tell you if they support Black developers like Kareem or whether they're supporting related. They couldn't even tell you because we do no analysis of that. So I just think we gotta go back and look at ourselves and what we're doing. That's where we started, and that's the only way we're going to advance. Nobody's going to save us but us.
Thank you. Well, I could listen to this panel for another 3 hours, but I'm getting the plug pulled on that. So let me thank everyone for coming out, and on behalf of the panel, I'm going to hand it off to the real boss here, Melinda.
So can we give a round of applause to our panelists and our moderator? So we have the space for a little while longer. I would love to see you all continue this conversation amongst yourselves, and if the panelists are around to have these conversations with you and enjoy the food. But we really appreciate you coming out and listening to us today. Take your own call of action from today's discussion. I mean, we can offer some on how to get involved and how to work with the folks on this panel and the folks in your community to cultivate the rich culture of communities of color, particularly Black communities in our city, so that they maintain, they thrive, and survive. I could talk about this all day. But again, happy Valentine's Day. Happy Black History Month, or African American Heritage Month. And we look forward to seeing you at our next ABNY event. Thank you, everyone.